Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here again. I don't know if it's been 12 months or 6 months. But, so, so I've got a little apology this morning. I've done this exhort before um, in Australia, and then I did a shortened version for Indonesia because it's going to be translated, and I've only got the shortened version. So this may be a little short, but hopefully it prepares our minds for the emblems before us, and uh, yeah, starts our week off in the correct frame of mind. So um, this morning I just wanted to have a look at the Last Supper. It was done at an ecclesial camp we did for the Gold Coast, where we have a husband of a sister from the meeting who is very enthusiastic, and he asked if I would look at 1 Corinthians 11 and the Last Supper. So this was an exhort in a camp setting, I guess. For us, when we think of the Last Supper, we always picture that the picture that's always up on the wall, and the disciples and Jesus are all standing there, and it looks like a warm, loving occasion. But when you look at it properly, it would have actually been quite humbling. It would have been a very sobering experience for the people there, like for the disciples. Um, so obviously, Jesus starts the Last Supper off with a small miracle, which I'll look at in Mark 4, verse 13 and 16. Where Jesus is speaking to his disciples, and he said to them, "Do you not understand the?" Oh, hang on, sorry, Mark 14. I was looking at that this morning. I missed a one. Mark 14. And he sent two of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the city, and a man will meet you carrying a pitcher of water. Follow him. Wherever he goes in, say to the master of the house, the teacher says, 'Where is the guest room in which I may eat the Passover with my disciples?' And then he will show you a large upper room furnished and prepared. There, make ready for us." And so his disciples went out and came into the city and found it just as he had said to them. They prepared the Passover. So everything Jesus did with the disciples, there was always some small miracle involved to enhance their faith. This morning we read in Luke 22, verse 24. This is just to give some background. So this part in some gospel records, this little bit is recorded at the Last Supper, but it's also recorded that they were disputing among themselves who was greatest before the Last Supper. Like it was an ongoing conversation they were having with each other. Therefore, in verse 24 it says, "Now there was also a dispute among them as to which of them should be considered the greatest." But as I say, that wasn't necessarily happening at the Last Supper. It was just happening between the disciples in general conversation. So Jesus begins, this is where I say Jesus is preparing his disciples to be leaders in the kingdom, and he starts off by humbling them, and it's quite a humbling experience when you look at it. In Matthew 26, verse 21, Jesus says, "Now as they were eating, he said, 'Assuredly I say unto you, one of you will betray me.'" He knew it was going to be Judas, but he never, in the whole Last Supper, in all four records, he doesn't actually name him. He says, "Be the one that takes bread with me," or whatever else. And he causes the disciples to examine themselves and think, "Oh, could that be me?" Like they cast doubt on themselves, on their own loyalty to Jesus. They wonder if, and that's what we come to do this morning. We come to examine ourselves um, and work out if we have betrayed Jesus, and make a commitment in the following week to try and be more like him. And as we know, we continue reading in verse 22 and 23. "And they were exceeding sorrowful, and each of them began to say to him, 'Lord, is it I?' So they all doubted themselves. They all knew that they could possibly betray Jesus. And he answered and said to them, 'He who dipped his hand with me in the dish will betray me. The Son of Man indeed goes just as it is written of him, but woe to that man by whom the Son of Man is betrayed. It would have been better for that man if he had not been born.'" Again, so if that's not humbling enough, in all four gospel records, Jesus points out that they will stumble. For example, in verse 31, while we're in Matthew 26, Jesus said unto them, all of you will be made to stumble me because of this night, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. So Jesus knows our weaknesses. He knew that when things got tough with the crucifixion, his disciples would scatter and leave him alone. And he's telling them this now. He's saying, they're at the Last Supper, and you will let me down. I know you will let me down. As if all that's not humbling enough, he goes in Luke 26, verse 33 and 34. He singles out Peter. Luke, let's see, 20. Yes, must be 22, verse 33 and 34. Peter says to Jesus, but he said to him, Lord, I'm ready to go with you, both to prison and to death. And then he said, I tell you, Peter, the rooster shall not crow this day before you will deny me 3 times that you know me. So again, humbling experience. First, he's pointed out they're all going to stumble, and he singles out Peter on his own and says, you are going to betray me. So again, after making them wonder if they could betray Jesus, they will all stumble and directly giving Peter a timeline for his betrayal. So Peter is actually told when he would betray Jesus. If there's actually a time like by the next morning, he would have done it. We read in John. Oh, yeah, let me just check John 13. John 13, 3 to 5. 3 to 15, sorry. So we'll read this. So Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands and that he had come from God and was going to God, rose up from supper and laid aside his garments, took a towel and girded himself. And after that he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. And he came to Simon Peter and said to him, Lord, are you washing my feet? And Jesus answered and said to him, what I am doing you do not understand now, but you will know after this. And Peter said to him, you shall never wash my feet. And Jesus answered him, if I do not wash your feet, you have no part with me. And Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. And Jesus said to him, he who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you. For he knew he who would betray him. Therefore he said, you are not all clean. So when he had washed his feet, taking his garments, he sat down again, and he said to them, do you know what I've done to you? And this is important now, what I want to look at. Do you know what I've done to you? And you call me teacher and Lord, and you say, well, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that you should do as I have done to you. And this when Jesus washes the disciples' feet, he's addressing so the last thing he deals with, he humbles them first with the pointing out they're going to stumble, pointing out that it's possible they could all betray him. He gets down, he washes their feet, and then he straight out addresses who's greatest among them in Luke 22, verse 25 to 30. So when we come to 1 Corinthians 11, we always read from verse 23 onwards, but we don't read the bit where it says, Christ is the head of man, man is the head of woman, and we leave that out because it upsets people these days with feminism and the way things are. And when we read that chapter in 1 Corinthians 11, this is how we should be reading it. This is how Jesus describes leadership. It's not how the world sees leadership. It's just after he's washed the disciples' feet. You're reading verse 25 to 30. And he said to them, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and those who exercise authority over them are called benefactors. And this is Jesus' point, but not so among you. On the contrary, he who is greatest among you, let him be as the younger, and he who governs as he who serves. Well, who is greater, he who sits at the table or he who serves? Is it not he who sits at the table? Yet I am among you as one who serves. What does it do? But you are those who have continued with me in my trials, and I bestow upon you a kingdom, as my Father bestowed upon me, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So Jesus goes to all that trouble to point out, to bring them, to make them consider themselves, to be humble, and not to aspire for leadership, but to aspire for a leadership based on humility and servitude, to get down and wash each other's feet, to be servants to each other, and not lording, not ruling over people, as that's how the world sees leadership. It's something that you strive for and you climb the corporate ladder and this and that, and it's something you push for. Whereas Jesus doesn't want us to do that. He wants us to realize that we need to serve humbly and lead humbly as well. So obviously we go to 1 Corinthians 11. This is where we examine ourselves in 1 Corinthians 11. And as we take the bread and the wine, we realize that if Jesus knew his disciples, after all the things they had seen Jesus do, all the miracles, all the forgiveness, if they could stumble, if they could betray Jesus, if they could forsake him right when he needed them most, how much chance have we got of doing the right thing? But Jesus has left us a way where we can be forgiven and approach before him. And not only that, Jesus, after he made the disciples aware of what they were capable of and everything else, he told them straight out that he wanted them to be rulers and kings with him in the kingdom. And that's what he wants from us as well. He wants us to be there. He has made the way clear that we can be forgiven and approach before God acceptably. So we'll just finish up with John 13, verse 35. For sure. John 13, verse 35. And it's one of my favorite verses where Jesus just says, "By this will all know that you are my disciples, if you have love one for another." So hopefully we'll take the bread in the morning.